You want me, a Dark Lord, to join up with you pathetic losers? Good idea!
Krondor was a town. I mean, it was a castle town. Or maybe it was just the castle. But it was still Krondor, capital of the western realm of the mighty Kingdom of the Isles. Words that meant basically nothing to me when I started playing, as I have never read the Riftwar series of books that this game is based on. However, one does not simply ignore an RPG frequently ranked among the best of all time for a reason as basic as not being familiar with the source material. If the one in question is me, at least. I don't know how you decide what to play. Now, let me set the scene. It was the early 90s and RPGs were in a veritable golden age on home computers. Origin Systems reigned supreme as Ultima was in its prime with Ultima 7, widely considered the peak of the franchise, and Ultima Underworld, progenitor of the immersive sim. Surtech was riding high with wizardry and using those profits to start dipping their toes into tabletop RPG adaptations by publishing the German-made Realms of Arcania. New World Computing were becoming a force to be reckoned with as Might and Magic went from strength to strength. SSI had a few more years before the D&D well went completely dry for them. Westwood Studios had redefined dungeon crawlers with Eye of the Beholder and its spiritual successor Lands of Lore. I screwed myself on the homestretch of Guardians of Destiny and have to start over. That's why it's taking so long for a follow-up.
The spirit is willing, but the flesh is spongy and bruised.
Interplay had impressed enough with Wasteland and The Bard's Tale to be able to make 2 Lord of the Rings RPGs. Whose dick do I have to suck to get these put up on GOG? To say nothing of the countless smaller companies searching for their breakout hit in the midst of this boom. Even the venerable Raven Software, hallowed be its name, got their start working on RPGs. I ask again, whose dick do I have to suck for digital releases?
Well,
With all the sweet, sweet RPG cheddar to be had, it's no surprise that Sierra would want to expand their empire beyond the adventure gaming realm, where they were only consistently rivaled by LucasArts, hallowed be its name. They had toyed with role-playing elements before, with the Quest for Glory series incorporating RPG elements to the point-and-click adventure formula, and on a lesser-known note, published DOS ports of Japanese PC classics Zeliard and Sorcerian in English. But up to this point, Sierra never had a full-fledged RPG to call their own. Then everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked. Whoops, wrong script. Then everything changed when they secured the video game rights to Raymond E. Feist's Riftwar Cycle. To any Riftwar fans watching, I apologize in advance for any mistakes regarding the lore of the series or any mispronounced terminology. I am not a well-read man. Not unless reading a ton of Magic Treehouse and Captain Underpants as a kid counts as being well-read. When I say that I had no familiarity with the series going in, I mean that I had zero familiarity with it. I do, however, have an immense respect for anyone who can spend over 30 years writing the same series and have such a massive body of work to show for it. I find writing scripts for these dumb videos of mine to be hard. I can't imagine spending as many years as I've been alive on this planet writing roughly 1 novel a year. So I won't disrespect Mr. Feist's work by blithely summarizing it in a paragraph or 2. Instead, I'll just explain the main conceit of the series as I understand it from playing today's game. While primarily set on the world of Midkemia, your traditional medieval European high fantasy setting, there are worlds and alternate dimensions capable of connecting to Midkemia by way of rift gates. Thus, any extra-dimensional war is dubbed a Rift War.
Oh, that's why they call it that.
For its part, Betrayal at Krondor is more concerned with the aftermath of a relatively more mundane invasion by Midkemia's own Dark Elves, known here as moredhel, whose invasion of the Kingdom of the Isles was a centerpiece of the 3rd book, A Darkness at Sethanon. Set 10 years after the moredhel were beaten back and their king was killed in battle, Betrayal at Krondor concerns itself with a simple question. What if not every Dark Elf is a war-hungry maniac? Gorath, once a powerful chieftain among the moredhel, has willfully abandoned his people in order to warn Prince Arutha that the moredhel's new king, Delicon, is massing an army for another invasion. With the aid of Signor Locklear, a trusted confidant of the prince, and apprentice magician Owen, Gorath must reach Krondor before it's too late, his kinsmen hounding the 3 every step of the way. And all the while, the puppets dance upon their strings. Released in 1993, roughly a year and some change before I was even born, Betrayal at Krondor was developed by Dynamics, whom Sierra had bought out in 1990. At the time, Dynamics were a company more known for their vehicle sims, including the original MechWarrior, adventure titles like Rise of the Dragon and The Adventures of Willie Beamish, and, in a neat footnote of gaming history, the proto-survival horror game Project Firestart. Not necessarily a resume that screams, first choice to develop our new RPG, but BioWare got started with the forgettable Shattered Steel before going on to punch us all in the teeth with the greatness that was Baldur's Gate 1 and 2. Dynamics, meanwhile, got the ball rolling on MechWarrior, the series Shattered Steel wishes it could be. So when you look at it that way, Dynamics were almost overqualified for the position. I realize this line of reasoning only makes sense to deranged Swan Man things. Just humor me. Gameplay is a mixture of the classic blobber formula, where your party advances as one amorphous blob from square to square while exploring, and a turn-based tactics-esque mode during combat. Exploration is rather disorienting at first, partially due to the extremely primitive 3D environments, but even more so because of the snap movements whenever you're walking or turning. Rather than the full 360-degree movement you might expect at first glance, Betrayal at Krondor employs a similar kind of step movement typical to games like Lands of Lore or the pre-3DO Might and Magics, just with more turning angles than the 4-direction positioning of those games. You can hold down a direction for smoother motions, but you'll wind up moving so fast in the process that you overshoot where you wanted to go. Or, if you're stupid, fall to your death because you were so focused on speeding through the dungeon that you neglected to keep an eye out for yawning chasms. Now, you do get used to the way movement feels after a couple hours, probably sooner if your cheap-ass keyboard doesn't crap out and make you have to use a combo of clicking the forward button in the HUD while turning left and right with the keypad. Why didn't I just rebind the movement keys in DOSBox to WASD, you ask? Good question! Beyond that adjustment period, though, this may be one of the most accessible RPGs of its time. The UI is clean and straightforward, and even though we're still well before tutorials were commonplace, nearly everything can be right-clicked on for more information. Amazing! An early 90s computer RPG where I don't need to consult the manual every 5 seconds to figure out what the hell I'm doing! Oh wait, that means it's not a true cult hardcore RPG. Sorry, Betrayal at Krondor. We're not allowed to enjoy games that don't hold our heads under the water until the bubbles stop. Sure, your encounters might be tough, but your common enemies don't have 4 fucking attacks per round by the 3rd town like in Albion. And I don't need to use trial and error to learn what spells and items do. Okay, a couple descriptions feel a bit vague on what exactly these consumables do, but weapons and equipment have viewable stat blocks and you get spell descriptions simply by mousing over them. Damn these modern games wanting people to actually play through them and have fun while doing so. In my day, our games hated us and we loved them for it. Please validate my existence. In all seriousness, I often like to try and see how far I can get in an old game without touching the manual. Not very is the usual answer to most computer RPGs from this time. With Betrayal at Krondor, though, I think the most I ever needed the manual for was to figure out how Owen learned new spells. He's dead weight for a good portion of the early game, and I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss out on something obvious. Turns out I just hadn't found any chests with spell scrolls in them yet. Ah yes, those accursed chests. Treasure chests come in 2 forms. Your standard RPG chest that may or may not be locked and or trapped, and moredhel wordlock chests. The former are simple once you understand that disarming traps is based on the party member with the best lockpicking skill. Then we get to the wordlock chests, and... riddles. Exactly the kind of evil I'd expect from Dark Elves. Only such a cruel people would force adventurers to solve riddles in order to open a treasure chest. The worst part is that I'm intelligent enough to appreciate the cleverness of many of these, while not being quite intelligent enough to actually solve half of them. Thank you, walkthroughs. Oh, don't give me that look. I tried, damn it. But these things are everywhere. It would have taken me twice as long or longer to finish this game if I'd stopped to brute force every riddle I couldn't answer.
You're a bigger fool than I ever imagined. Huh? You're a bigger fool than I ever imagined.
While you explore around, and you will want to explore around in order to be prepared for later chapters, you'll want to keep a good supply of rations in each party member's inventory. Resting is the only affordable way to heal up at the start, and it's hard to get back to good health on an empty stomach. Though don't just go grabbing every ration pack you find in the world either. Some devious little designer had the crafty idea of making poisoned and spoiled rations share the same sprite as the normal ones. Right-click, my friends. Always right-click. In addition, resting in the great outdoors or in dungeons will only restore your party's health and stamina up to a certain point. If you want it back to max, you'll have to either use one of those valuable restorative potions you've picked up, or trek all the way back to the nearest inn. And those cheap bastards don't give board with the room. Unlike the vast majority of RPGs at the time, and even these days come to think of it, Betrayal at Krondor doesn't possess any experience levels at all. Instead, what we have are a collection of skills that run on a percentage scale and improve as the character uses that skill. If you're feeling saucy, you can even set a priority on specific skills so that they'll improve faster. I probably did it wrong by setting 4 or 5 as priority rather than grinding them one at a time, but it worked well enough that I made it to the end. Having been introduced to the Elder Scrolls at an early age with Morrowind, I've always had a fondness for this kind of progression. When done right, it can provide a consistent, satisfying sense of improvement even better than mere experience levels can. Your characters also possess 4 core stats: health, stamina, strength, and speed. While strength levels similarly to your skills, speed, which determines how far a character can move in one turn, can't be improved at all unless I missed something. And health and stamina only improve by 1 point each every 28 in-game days, which passes by a lot faster than you might think. It's a good thing that there's no actual time limit to any major objectives here. You can spend as much time as you want exploring around the world, which is downright massive for the time, and Delicon will patiently wait for you to progress the plot before moving his armies anywhere. The only things actually stopping you from going wherever you will are enemy mobs too strong for your party to handle, and the occasional story wall penning you inside a section of the map in a few later chapters. Speaking of later chapters, you may have noticed that the on-screen party has changed a few times by now. That's because your active characters will switch from chapter to chapter. In another welcome change of pace compared to other RPGs that do something similar, when you exchange Locklear for Senior James after Chapter 1, Locklear's stuff gets put in an easily accessible closet just in case you had him carrying anything valuable. So even if you were caught flat-footed by switching party members on your first playthrough, you don't lose your best gear and now have a notion that this could happen again. It's so rare to find such a player-conscious design element in a computer RPG this old. Usually these games feel like they were made by sadists who got off on new players getting absolutely wrecked. I still love them though. Moving on to the combat, I'm of two minds on Betrayal at Krondor's combat system. On the one hand, it's so simple that only an absolute idiot could fail to understand it. On the other, that same simplicity means nearly all combat encounters feel indistinguishable from one another.
You look familiar. Haven't we met before? Or did you just join us, huh?
Combat plays out on a square grid reminiscent of a chessboard, and attacking operates on a chance to hit percentage based on the chosen character's skill with either melee, ranged, or magic combat. Defending characters also get a chance to block based on their defense skill. Expect to miss a lot in the early game. Melee is the primary focus here, as you can only use a crossbow or cast a spell if there is no enemy within one square around the character. The AI is thankfully beholden to the same rule, save for magic creatures which can cast spells in melee, so the best strategy when facing mages is to rush them in order to keep them from using any of that sorcery garbage. Though enemies know this as well, and 1 or 2 fighters will always wind up making a beeline for Owen right at the start. The only real solution I found to this is to make sure that I had initiative at the start of combat. See, enemy mobs in Betrayal at Krondor are viewable in the game world while exploring, and if you click on an enemy sprite before getting too close, your party will try to catch them by surprise. Whether or not it works will depend on the worst stealth skill in your party. But with enough time and the occasional bit of save scumming, by the end you'll be starting every non-ambush combat on your terms. And those ambushes are a great place to grind up that stealth skill once you've gotten a party member's scouting up to a decent level. If, while exploring, you're ever stopped by a scene like this of a character pointing out signs of enemies lying in wait, immediately quick save and take a step forward. If you don't trigger an ambush on that step, the stealth skills of your entire party will improve. Keep quick saving and stepping until you trigger the ambush every time you reload, and you'll have the stealthiest party on Mid-Camia in no time flat. Back to combat proper, you have 2 different melee attacks. A left click will do a thrust attack, which is more accurate and can be executed on any opponent within movement range, while a right click will perform a swing, which requires the character to already be standing next to the opponent and is less accurate, but does more damage at the cost of 1 stamina point. I wouldn't recommend bothering with swings until the party member in question has at least an 80% chance to hit with it. That 1 stamina point may not seem like much, but it adds up very quickly when stamina also functions similarly to armor points in an FPS. Any damage taken first drains a character's stamina, and only once their stamina pool is empty will their health start to go down. However, it's not quite as simple as a second meter going down at that point. As the lower a character's HP gets, the worse they get at everything. Which makes sense. I'd assume it's much harder to swing a sword correctly when you're in massive amounts of pain and bleeding like a stuck pig. It's just rare to see a character's health matter like this in a video game. Usually in games like this, the biggest difference between max health and one hit point left is how damaged their portrait looks.
'Tis but a scratch.
I never found myself ever consistently using crossbows, the only ranged weapons in the game. They were nice to have in a pinch for sure, but they didn't provide the same kind of advantage in combat that getting up close and personal with the spellcaster did. Plus, relying on it more meant that I would have needed to carry around more than one quarrel at a time, and one more thing I'd need to constantly maintain. Spellcasting, though, there's no way you're surviving too much of the late game if you don't make sure to build up Owen's spellbook. I don't know how I would have beaten Betrayal at Krondor without Skin of the Dragon. Invisible armor that blocks all incoming damage with a duration based on how much stamina or health you spend to cast it may seem ridiculously OP, but that's because you haven't seen the damage these late game mobs can do. And yes, you heard right, there aren't any spell points here. You need to cast magic from stamina, or if you're desperate, health. So you shouldn't be going spell crazy unless you're sure no one will reach Owen in time. If you ask me, it's a very cool risk-reward system which further helps fuel the sense of becoming an all-powerful badass by the end once you have a decent enough stamina pool to be taking those risks more and more. You'll notice though how little I've actually spoken about the enemies you'll face beyond their combat roles. Aside from the Nighthawks in Chapter 3 who can resurrect into the more powerful Black Slayers if you don't finish combat soon enough or cast Final Rest on their corpses, and one super late game enemy type which can only be damaged with Strength Drain, it isn't all that necessary to learn enemies' unique strengths and weaknesses. I can count the number of times I bothered with the assessment option on one hand. I ain't wasting a turn to find out the details on one specific enemy when stabbing them works just fine.
I figured it out. We just need to hit them really, really hard.
Now we do have puzzle encounters to mix things up a bit. From time to time you'll stumble into a magic trap that requires you to create a safe path through to the other side. This mainly involves pushing blue versions of a Sims plumb bob into the correct spots to either block a... what is that? A magic laser cannon? Oh, a fireball launcher. That makes more sense? To either block a fireball launcher with a solid plumb bob, or use a wireframe plumb bob to trick it into shooting one of the other traps. Plumb bob. Once I figured out what the hell I was supposed to do, which I just remembered was the other reason I needed to check the manual, these were more annoyances than a refreshing break from normal combat. The best use I found for them was that I could take the time to spam the skip turn option to get some healing in without needing to rest. All in all, if you're a hardcore stat cruncher who loves building the perfect party to face off against all manner of challenges, you probably won't enjoy Betrayal at Krondor's encounters. Personally, I'm not too picky about my RPG combat. Some are better than others, yes, but I tend to view it as a facilitator of what I love about RPGs the most, watching my numbers go up as I follow an engaging narrative. From that perspective, Betrayal at Krondor does its job just fine. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Tramplefoot is an African forest elephant with a deep passion for gaming which verges on the psychotic, who ascended to the presidency of the United Pachyderm Republic in... Oh, you wanted me to talk about the visuals. In hindsight, that seems kind of obvious. There really isn't any getting around the fact that this game's visuals have aged like crap. While everyone looks reasonably okay in the opening and ending slideshows, there really isn't enough motion for me to call them cutscenes. Placing live-action sprites in a full 3D world at a time when 3D environments were still so primitive was a terrible idea. Both feel at complete odds with each other stylistically, and the obvious budget issues do nothing to help matters. If you hadn't noticed while I was talking about the combat, characters don't have walking animations. They just kinda slide to their destination. The step movement in the overworld feels like they couldn't get more typical 3D movement to work correctly in time. And beyond enemies, you will never see any walk-around NPCs. Instead, you have specific spots in the game where you'll run into the same NPC over and over whether you want to talk to them or not. This can be kind of annoying when a quest has you backtracking and you have to click through the same conversation again just to tell them that you're still doing the quest they gave you. To say nothing of how badly crunched the combat sprites are that it's damn near impossible to tell what half the enemies in the game are unless they make it to the back rows. And to twist the knife of what the art style of this whole game could have been, look at the gorgeous pixel art used for major locations. Obviously, the whole game couldn't have looked this lavish without taking another few years and ballooning the budget, but imagine what they could have done with the characters in an art style like this. In fact, for comparison's sake, let's take a look at the Elder Scrolls Arena, released just under a year later. Sure, this game is a glorified tech demo for Bethesda's engine at the time, and demonstrates exactly why relying too heavily on procedurally generated environments makes for an incredibly boring game, but it has Betrayal at Krondor beaten the graphics department by a wide margin. Though that's the only thing Arena has over it. It's the music that saves the presentation entirely. It doesn't make the game look any better, but Jan Paul Moorhead's score adds more than enough dramatic flair to make up for it. Despite never having come close to creating music for a fantasy setting before, Moorhead utilized every bit of MIDI power he could to create a digital orchestra worthy of a proper high fantasy epic. In a game with so little animation and zero voice acting, I cannot stress enough how fundamental the music is to setting the scene, and this soundtrack does just that perfectly with MIDI music alone. I can only imagine how amazing a proper orchestral arrangement of this would sound. Yet such great music would ultimately be meaningless without a comparable story to go along with it, so it's a good thing that Betrayal at Krondor is brilliantly written. Lacking the visual horsepower to properly tell its story any other way, Betrayal at Krondor hits you early and often with lengthy passages of text, which seems appropriate considering its source material. This extends to more than just story moments as well. This game is not afraid to paint a picture with words and provides lengthy descriptions of even basic items. While I'm admittedly not well read, that doesn't mean I hate reading. Some of my favorite games of all time practically drown you in walls of text. Isn't that right, Planescape?
Updated my journal.
So when I say that I found Betrayal at Krondor's writing to be enthralling from start to finish, keep in mind that I've defeated the Transcendent One with only my words. I've overcome my vices and cracked the case in Martinez. And I really can't think of a clever way to reference Pillars of Eternity's ending without spoiling it, but I needed a third thing to reference here for the rule of 3. Betrayal at Krondor may not be the genre deconstruction those games are, nor does it aspire to be one, but that doesn't make its writing any less fantastic. What value in all Myrmidamis's speeches did we gain but to learn that we are weak? What spirit did we discover in defeat except that we are corrupt from within? The time has come to blunt our blades and look to our own, to put down the monsters that we have become. Rather than a deconstruction, what we have here is a proud example of high fantasy which possesses layered, nuanced characters with understandable motivations, even amongst many of the villains. It's a story focused on the people in this world and how the events unfolding affect them, rather than dumping tons and tons of lore on the audience at a moment's notice. Betrayal at Krondor gets what so many fantasy tales, and not just video games, misunderstand. Your world is only as interesting as the characters who populate it. That may sound obvious, because it is, but it's all too easy for the enthusiasm you have for a world you've created to smother the fact that you forgot to make a story worth telling in that world. Oh, ha ha ha, easy joke. No, that story was worth telling. Lucas just can't write romantic dialogue to save his life. So imagine my shock when, after reading pages upon pages of novel-quality writing, I learned that Raymond E. Feist had next to nothing to do with the story of Betrayal at Krondor. Beyond supervising the production and likely correcting a few aspects here and there for the finalized version, Feist had little direct involvement when it came to Betrayal at Krondor's inarguably greatest asset. Credit instead goes to Neil Halford, who previously worked as designer and writer of New World Computing's Planet's Edge. A fact which just got that copy I bought off of GOG bumped up a few dozen notches on the priority list. Additionally, Mr. Halford would later go on to write the scripts for the first 2 Dungeon Siege games, so he's also responsible for a big chunk of my childhood, and afterwards... No. No, no, no. I refuse to believe that the same man capable of Betrayal at Krondor had anything to do with fucking Golden Axe Beast Rider. That's it. I'm done. Reality is too stupid. I'm off to go drown myself in escapism. See you never again, assholes. I just realized this is my escapism. As recompense, let's read an amusing excerpt from the game. Owen saw a dim light. It was hazy and without form, but it quickly began to grow in intensity and definition. And rushing beside it, pain. A dull, throbbing pain in his head and limbs that hurt more with each beat of his heart. His eyelids flickered open, and he could make out Gorath's form standing over him, though it was shrouded and somehow unreal, like a dream. But he knew it wasn't a dream. He knew he had survived his trip through the water cave, and with the realization he was alive, he managed to whisper hoarsely, "If you ever put us through that again, I will invent a cantrip whose sole purpose," he began to speak more rapidly and coherently, "is to cause you to fall desperately in love with a warthog. May you two live happily ever after." Gorath smiled, unusual for the normally sedate moredhel, water still dripping from his hair. "I'm glad your sense of humor has returned. When you came up on the riverbanks and did not breathe, I was afraid you were lost." Owen stood slowly and painfully. Gorath helped him with his pack, and soon they were ready to leave.
You thought I was asleep, didn't you? Acting.
Owen and Gorath's odd couple act forms the heart of Betrayal at Krondor's narrative. While Locklear or James may at first appear to be the real hero of the story, especially once you find out that they're major players in the books and that James is one of the most popular characters in the whole series, it steadily becomes apparent that this is Owen and Gorath's tale. More so Gorath's than Owen's, but given the sequel plans Halford has mentioned in interviews, this was clearly intended to be the start of Owen's true journey. Kinda like how Anakin isn't the protagonist of The Phantom Menace. Wow, I cannot stop hyperfixating on Star Wars lately. It's a nice break from the usual wrestle brain I suffer from.
What do you mean the engines are offline? We're supposed to have unlimited power!
As our tale unfolds, it becomes increasingly clear that this is Gorath's world, and we're just living in it. At the start, he's a reserved, inscrutable character whose motives are suspect at best. In all the centuries of fighting, moredhel haven't exactly made themselves out to be reasonable folk. Plus, the game's called Betrayal at Krondor, and our friend here adorns the cover as an ominous hooded figure about to strike. At least I think that's supposed to be Gorath. It's only his facial hair that's white in the game. If it had been telegraphed any more, it'd be mistaken for an old wartime communique. Which is what makes Gorath such a fascinating character, as you steadily realize that he truly is an honorable soul trying to do what he thinks is best for his people, no matter how much they may hate him for it. And the tragedies don't stop coming. Spoilers from here on out. If you don't want the late game of Betrayal at Krondor spoiled for you, skip ahead to this timecode here. In truth, warning Krondor of the coming invasion had been part of Delacon's plan all along. He wanted his foes massed at the most obvious invasion point in order to draw their forces away from his true target, Sethanon, which he plans to reach through a rift gate created with the help of his secret allies, a group of Surani mages known as the Six. Again, I've never read the books, so I have little knowledge or understanding of the specifics surrounding the Surani beyond the basics of them being from another world, and that world being home to the assembly of mages which Riftwar's main hero, Pug Condoin, I'm going to be eviscerated because of that pronunciation, I just know it, belongs to. Thankfully, that connection is all you really need to understand for the story to work, for it's Pug who suffers the titular betrayal at Krondor, when the mage Makala arrives to inform his acquaintance that he has kidnapped Pug's daughter Gamina and imprisoned her on a desolate world. He claims that it's due to long-held Surani belief of women capable of wielding magic being a danger, but we'll soon see that it was all simply to remove Pug from the board. Which is a smart move, as if my cursory research and what I gleaned from the game's story is correct, Pug is on a story-breaking level of power by this point in the series and could easily put a stop to the villains with a snap of his fingers if needed. Tricking the biggest danger to your plans into leaving in a rush right when he's needed most is a stroke of genius. And indeed, it's Makala who's been pulling the strings all along. Both in and out of story, it's an excellent bait and switch that keeps everyone's focus so strongly on the moredhel that they ignore the repeated instances of Surani involvement. With Pug missing in action, it's up to Owen and Gorath to find him before it's too late. However, the sole clue he left behind is a cryptic hint that can only be deciphered by his closest friend, Tomas, who just so happens to be the war leader of Elvendar. Bringing a moredhel into the home of his greatest enemies. What could go wrong? It was not my intent to alarm you, only to reassure you that no matter what may happen between here and Elvendar, I have come to consider you a friend. I swear to God, if one of these holier-than-thou elves so much as touches you, Gorath, I'm burning this entire forest to the fucking ground. You're right there next to Garrus, and Lieutenant Kim is one of the best bros a guy could ask for, you hear me? Once we make it to Elvendar, we're subjected to one of the saddest scenes in the whole game as Gorath is forced to renounce his status as a moredhel in order to prove to the elves that he's trustworthy. I can't say I completely understood what the returning itself entails for Dark Elves, but the narration is beautifully harrowing in this moment as it depicts Gorath's rage, indignation, and shame at doing so. For all that he endured, Gorath truly loved his people and wanted a better life for all of them. Not in submission to the Aledhel way of life, but for the moredhel to stand on their own 2 feet. Now, even if they manage to reach such a future, Gorath will never see it with his own eyes, as he is now Aledhel. A man is forced to sacrifice his own cultural identity in order to save his people. This would be a profoundly deep moment even in a modern game. My jaw practically hit the floor seeing a game from 1993 broach a topic like this. Now can I please give Gorath a hug? After Gorath has sufficiently degraded himself before his so-called brethren, Tomas, unable to go himself due to suffering the after effects of a poisoned arrow, sends our heroes to where he discerned Pug to have gone. And it's a good thing that a swordsman like Gorath was sent, as there appears to be no magic at all on this planet. This is actually a really cool chapter as it throws a massive wrench in your very likely complacent battle strategy, forcing you to deal with 0 magic until you're finally able to discern that mana does still exist here, but it's in solid, crystalline form. So once you do get your magic back, you're still forced to ration it out as these magic crystals are in short supply for much of your stay here. After definitely not checking literally everywhere else first to the point of stumbling into the final battle of this chapter, you'll find that in his haste to save his daughter, Pug foolishly drank from a magical cup which drained him of all of his spells and memories. Fortunately, all that wandering around led to Owen and Gorath already possessing a blessed version of that same cup, which allows Owen to share his magical knowledge with Pug. Though still nowhere near the force of nature he is in the books, Pug is a welcome third member of the party after so many hours of making do with just Owen and Gorath. With the help of his rescuers, Pug is able to save his daughter at last and teleports the group back to Midkemia. In the meantime, James, Locklear, and Patris's unconscious body scour the Dimwood for the rift Delacon's forces have been using to circumvent their defensive lines. This was probably my least favorite chapter in the whole game, as it's little more than difficult combat after difficult combat as you ping-pong across a single location in order to find the rift gate. The only reason I feel the need to mention it at all is for the moment Patris is sucked in and killed by the collapsing rift gate at the end of the chapter. Mechanically, he sucked, but he was an entertaining old coot who didn't deserve that gruesome of a death. Owen, Gorath, and Pug arrive seconds later, and after being brought up to speed, set off to Sethanon for the final confrontation. Fighting their way through Delacon's elite soldiers and putting an end to the Six, our heroes reach the chamber of the Oracle of All, the dragon who guards the true secret of Sethanon. Learning that the Oracle was disabled by Mikalla's magic, Pug orders Gorath to stay behind and guard the Oracle while he and Owen press on to face Mikalla. Whereupon we're confronted with his true objective all along, the Lifestone. Hidden deep beneath Sethanon, the Lifestone is an ancient artifact connected to Midkemia's old masters, the Valheru. Recognizing the danger of the artifact during the previous Battle of Sethanon, Pug had its existence hidden from the world, believing it better to be forgotten to the mists of time than tempt anyone into using it for their own ends. But for Mikalla, it is a clear and present danger which must be destroyed, making the honestly fair point that Pug had unilaterally decided his course of action without even consulting the Assembly on it. Then again, Pug also makes a good point that there's no guarantee destroying it won't unleash something horrible. Breaking ancient magical artifacts doesn't typically go well in my experience. Pretty sure my left kidney is still possessed after I broke that evil talking 10-speed. Well-intentioned or not, Mikalla still took Pug's daughter hostage and unleashed a moredhel invasion simply to serve as a distraction. That's more than enough reason for Pug and Owen to stand against him in this moment. Truth be told, the fight itself is kinda disappointing. Lacking your heavy hitter for the final boss would normally be a huge hindrance, but not when you have Skin of the Dragon and good offensive magic. It doesn't matter how much health you've got when you can't hit back, eh, Mikalla?
Hacks! I call hacks!
But you barely have the time to breathe a sigh of relief after Mikalla's defeat before Delakon and Gorath's fight spills into the Lifestone's chamber. Clearly outmatched in a straight-up fight against Gorath, Delakon uses a momentary lapse in his old enemy's focus to lunge for the sword lodged within the Lifestone. Before the mages have time to react, Gorath grabs the sword himself to prevent the Mad King from unleashing whatever is inside it. Answering that mystery almost immediately are the Valheru spirits who attempt to possess the two moredhel. The one in Delakon getting far enough to briefly transform his body into a completely different form. Pug makes it clear that there's only one way they can prevent the spirits from wreaking havoc in the world above. He and Owen must kill Gorath and Delakon. True to form, Gorath accepts his fate and demands Owen go through with it. And just like that, Gorath is gone. To pour salt on the wound, the secrecy of the Lifestone's existence means that his final days, all of his sacrifices, his true heroism, will never be known to the world at large. To the moredhel, he will always be remembered as a traitor. To the Kingdom of the Isles, he will be remembered as a strange elf who traveled with the real heroes, if even that. A crushingly tragic yet fitting end to one so willing to give everything of himself for his people. We wrap up with a clever bit of trickery on Pug's part, as he conjures up illusions of Delakon and Myrmindamus, whom Delakon had led his soldiers to believe they were in Sethanon to rescue, to be killed before the moredhel army's eyes to put to bed any notion of either's survival, and lets them take an ordinary sword made to seem all-powerful back as something for the chieftains to fight over once the forces make it back north. Finally, Betrayal at Krondor ends on Pug offering Owen a chance to study at the Stardock Magical Academy as a tease for the sequel that never was. Excuse me while I go scream into the void for a bit. After playing Betrayal at Krondor myself at long last, I can say for certain that this is regarded as one of the best computer RPGs of all time for a damn good reason. If you can look past the ugly visuals, you'll find a game with a solid combat loop, great mechanics, and an utterly enthralling story that more than holds up after 32 years. I would also label it as one of the most accessible CRPGs from this era. All too often, the thing holding back many of Betrayal at Krondor's similarly great contemporaries from being easy to recommend to inexperienced players is the sheer cliff you're expected to climb in the beginning. Those first 10 or so hours typically being spent with one hand on the mouse, one on the keyboard, and a third holding the manual. Not so here. While there is for sure still a learning curve, it's very much a smooth curve and not a straight line going up, which means that I really hope that you'll give Betrayal at Krondor a shot for yourself, even if you're not used to older RPGs. That you can get it bundled with its spiritual successor Betrayal in Antara for $6 on GOG or Steam is an absolute steal. And speaking of that spiritual successor, I suppose this is about the point where I have to acknowledge Sierra's colossal fuck-up after Betrayal at Krondor's release. See, this game was released at a time when PC gaming was in the later stages of transitioning from floppy disks to CDs. And despite the rave reviews, Sierra panicked at the low sales of the floppy version, swiftly sold the video game rights to Riftwar back to Feist, and restructured dynamics to focus entirely on sim games. Then the CD version released the next year to even more acclaim and became a bestseller. By then, though, it was far too late and the rights were soon scooped up by 7th Level, forcing Sierra to start work on a spiritual successor instead. Ironically, 7th Level's mishandling of Return to Krondor's development would lead to Sierra publishing it themselves, which probably didn't help things when it turned out that Return wasn't all that much like its predecessor. So, Sierra had their big money RPG franchise and pissed it all away in an instant because they couldn't be bothered to wait and see how both versions sold. I'm gonna go scream into the void again. Next time it's Monkey Island 1 and 2. I'll see you then.
Well, well, well. Guybrush Threepwood, you do turn up in the strangest places.
Jinkies, I must raid the fridge, eat an entire ham, and perform magic incorrectly.
I can't help but feel that I've been insulted.